Welcome to the Future of Work with Subbu Iyer, a video podcast series. In the first few episodes, the effort is going to revolve around creating a uniform narrative around the subject of the future of work. We are at a strategic inflection point on our planet where every single station of life is facing an existential crisis. Environment faces the danger of climate crisis. We need a transformation from plundering ecological resources to renewing them. Education faces the crisis of irrelevant pedagogy, curriculum, and industry preparedness of both its educators and pupils. We need a transformation from quantum to quality of education. Health faces the crisis of increased rate of disease advancement from local to global pandemic levels. We need a transformation in healthcare, addressing life, learning, and living before the eventuality of disease, decay, and death. Wealth faces the crisis of debt at the individual micro level to the macro societal level with irreconcilable burden. We need a transformation of equitable income commensurate to an increased capability. Mobility faces the crisis of unplanned urbanization, leaving supply, value creation, and demand in disarray. We need to see digital data bridge the physical and virtual to produce transformational outcomes. Governance faces the challenge of divisive narratives that needs to be transformed with democratic systems and data autonomy. Technology faces the crisis of ethics. While the societies have evolved to a financial ecosystem, we need to transform it to a human ecosystem to make digital technologies valuable. Across the planet, despite the COVID disrupting life negatively and imminent crises looming large, we seem to carry on as though nothing happened. The old ways have to stop. The structures, synergies, and systems they operated on must be transformed. This is not an incremental change, but a transformation. The future of work will have to be an intelligent one, not a passively consuming but rather an actively contributing one. Every single one of us, in every single role we play in our lives, will have to be immersed and involved. It is not a minority, but rather a majority of us who must make the initiative to lead with inquiry, exploration, and discovery. This should lead no one in doubt that each of the age segments of 8 to 18, Gen A, 18 to 25, Gen Z, 25 to 40, Gen Y, 40 to 60, Gen X, and 60 plus, baby boomers, have a different value to create in the future of work. Definition is the minimum threshold that we need to arrive at to advance the topic to competence and excellence, transitioning into the future. There is a great sense of urgency needed because we find the narration around the subject of future of work not even in the area of innocence, leave alone understanding and awareness before definition. To address the future of work, the 4 pegs that are important to establish are the workforce, workplace, operations, and innovation. The future of work is the continuous flow across these 4 pegs with intelligence that will determine the successful passage of a life in crisis to a thriving life. The Gen A and Gen Z are our real future workforce, and they need to be inculcated with the right values to guide them become effective forces of transformation. We decided to start our podcast journey at 2 of India's most prestigious portals of education, the IIT Madras and IIM Bangalore. In this episode, our guest is Professor Dr. Mahesh Panchagnula, Dean, Alumni and Corporate Relations, Professor of Applied Mechanics at Indian Institute of Technology Madras. He is pursuing data science, offering a new frontier in exploring and solving problems in fluid dynamics. His research philosophy is to place the student's learning at the center of the interaction. Science needs to marry technology. We don't see its manifestation in life.
When you say science is married to technology, I'll change the relationship. Science begets technology. I give this example of a USB drive. USB drive started 40 years ago as a science breakthrough in someone's lab, where they figured out a way to store a bit that was not going to deplete away with time. And every storage device in a mobile phone uses some sort of a storage technology that relies on a science breakthrough from a long time ago. These two streams in the education community and in the education parlance have sort of gotten diverse, which is not good. You're right. So one may even accuse our society of sending its brightest children to technology and medicine, not as many into the fields of sciences. There is a reason for that. Clearly professional courses promise a profession downstream, and somehow we have developed this confusion that education is for livelihood, not for life. I want to see a day in India when we choose education for life. By becoming a more opulent society, when a lower middle class family isn't trying to break in to buy a refrigerator, when almost everybody has the basic luxuries. I'll define a class called basic luxuries.
Right.
When these basic luxuries are serviced, I'll say that we are ready for a day when our children will choose education for life. I think I will give myself another decade before that choice, both those choices become mainstream competitive, where science education is taught at the same level of competence as engineering education or technology and medicine education. The second, like I said, this whole societal opulence, the standard of living, standard of life sort of improving. And as a windfall of these, I expect to see our children also develop a sense of independence, developing their careers on their strengths. I believe will happen, in the next, as we move forward, maybe another half a generation is needed for that change to happen.
You said a period of time. Can that period of time with education, the pedagogy, the outcomes, to more innovation, to more sustainability in our societies, can that be hastened at least in the IITs?
I'll say at the IITs, some of what you're describing has already happened. Some of it is in the pipeline, meaning that won't take a decade. I was referring to more the larger society. At the IITs, what we should do is not just implement it for a few 10,000 students here, but also set a role model in terms of how this can be duplicated elsewhere by almost writing down an SOP. For example, the idea of sustainability being taught in a curriculum doesn't exist today in India. Okay? Right. We have some thoughts in our pipeline to sort of bring the idea of sustainability into mainstream undergraduate and postgraduate education. A parallel to this goes back several decades when the Supreme Court of India had to step in to mandate that every undergrad curriculum requires a 1 credit course on environment and ecology. It's being taught in every engineering curriculum in the country today, has a little 1 credit course. Every curricular change for the positive need not involve the Supreme Court of India. I think some of this is commonsensical. We will do it. I would like to see a day when not just every IIT student, but every student in India learns the fundamental concepts of sustainability. How do you lead a life sustainably? And what does plastic do in the world today? For example, single-use plastic. Single-use plastic is an absolute waste of energy. There are much better ways of living our life. So if I had a conscious choice to make, buying a kilo of atta in a single-use plastic bag versus taking some form of a cloth bag or some form of a reusable packaging and buying the atta, a more knowledgeable and a sensitized person should choose the latter. So, creating that army of sensitized young men and women has to be one of the duties of the university system in India. We are only beginning that journey now. The broader picture of introducing innovation into curriculum, I will say, is a very difficult path to tread given all of the knots we've wrapped ourselves into. What could be easier is if you created an extra curricular system that has its own parallel reward structure that rewards students for achievements in that realm. Countries that have achieved innovation or sort of have figured out a way to blend innovation into their curricula, and these are mostly smaller countries, have this as one of the ways by which they've brought innovation into a student's life. I remember as a high school student, we had one hour in the week called Socially Useful Productive Work, SUPW. Now, the intent I'm sure was all good, but the way we sort of brought, way the curriculum, that part of the curriculum was brought in, didn't help the cause. And more importantly, the fact that it was part of my curriculum, because of the value system we place on curriculum, it didn't help the primary cause of innovation. So innovation cannot be letter graded at the end of 6 months or 3 months.
True.
The rest of the when the rest of the curriculum is being letter graded at the end of 3 months and 6 months and 12 months,
right,
this one strand of the curriculum cannot be left out.
We want to prevent the usage of plastic, but we are not preventing the creation of plastic. Humans are intrinsically designed to find alternate means of life, and in that comes livelihood, and that comes sustenance. So on one hand, we want to prevent the use of plastics, but on the other hand, we have never found alternative livelihoods. We are not able to distinguish between marketplaces and ecosystems.
What are the distinguishing elements of marketplaces and ecosystem?
In a marketplace, everything you do is from the perspective of profit.
Sure.
There is nothing wrong about it, but that's what it is. And that is how we have evolved as a society from many decades through, as I call it, through 4 industrial revolutions, through 3 web versions, and perhaps the 5th version of the society that we live in as we know modern life. This is a financial ecosystem driven society where there are a few people who have had the power, and they have been able to control a larger society with that power, and that power has originated from money. And today an idea can actually secure capital, financial capital, but that financial capital is useless if you do not have the ability to create value.
Sure.
But that value has to be created for the right reason, so you need intellectual capital for it, and therefore you need capabilities for it, which is basically the human capital. So today we have that ability to move that structure from a financial capital oriented society to a human capital oriented society, simply because humans can get connected to anyone, anywhere, anyhow on this planet if we want to.
Sure. I agree with you on both those counts. Back to the single-use plastic question. The way we have structured our systems, as you said, it's a marketplace. So let's just take the marketplace for single-use plastic, from the pellets producer down to the final consumer. Our thinking has been, if I interfere and if I change the behavior of the final end consumer, that ripple will propagate upstream, and the production of single-use plastic will pivot around. The producers of single-use plastic would pivot around to do something else. So we rely on these market forces propagating this information upstream to say even a solopreneur, they are entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
So they got into this business with a motive of making some money. They will get out of this business when the money evaporates. So we rely on that paradigm. If we were to look at this only as an ecosystem, then we will constantly need an injection of energy. For example, if you just take a predator-prey ecosystem, any predator-prey ecosystem to be in balance requires a humongous injection of energy in the form of the natural system uses a humongous injection of solar energy captured through photosynthesis and then trickling up to the final predator. So this would anytime, let's say our financial ecosystem, just yesterday the Prime Minister, the government made an announcement that UPI will be free for some time to come at least. I'm worried about that actually. They've created UPI as an infrastructural element, as an ecosystem element, which by definition will consume energy. NPCIL, will consume some amount of energy to keep this massive infrastructure going. So I am assuming they are going to let this be free for some time until the whole economy matures to where a 0.1% surcharge doesn't hurt. That's the only sustainable way. So in other words, my thinking is ecosystems are good, but for them to sustain, they either require this constant injection of energy or will have to evolve into a marketplace.
The predatory ecosystems survive beautifully among themselves, despite the fact that there is an elephant and an ant in the same forest. So if we can learn from that, there is an ecosystem that we can create. And if we didn't create the framework for that ecosystem, then it's not going to happen. But this is the best pivot on this planet at this point in time to make that happen, and there is a dire need for it.
The objective function for an ecosystem is different from the objective function of a marketplace. A predator-prey ecosystem has a very different objective function. It maximizes the chance of every generation passing the genes on to the next. They are not in the business of occupying more land and leaving less for the ants. An elephant isn't trying to do that. So I think we are learning how to morph our objective function from what was explicitly written for a marketplace into what is explicitly written or understood for an ecosystem. For example, there's this renewed emphasis on environment sustainability and governance in corporate board meetings, right? It started out probably as lip service, but today there's some real money tied to it. Mm-hmm. There are bank interest rates that are tied to how ESG compliant a company is. As you move forward, one could imagine an increased emphasis on those aspects and less emphasis on profitability. So if you let these objective functions slide over with human labor happiness overtaking the profitability of a company, in the way we measure companies, one could imagine a different way by which companies would get structured and reward themselves. So, and ecosystems have a very different reward structure completely. When you look at the baby steps we are taking, thanks to the alarms that have been raised by the UN scientists, as you said, I look at what companies are now portraying themselves as little baby steps towards becoming more ecosystem partners.
Right.
One could imagine a Samsung and a TSMC being ecosystem partners, not just vendor customers.
Right. Can you walk us through any of the little steps that IIT as an institution or your industry relations, that is industry working with IIT, is able to produce? Those are significant moonshots or even steps towards those moonshots.
My office here oversees our relationship, IIT's relationship with our 53,000 plus alumni and several hundred corporate partners. And I tell all of these people that if you treated this like any other job outside, you are doing yourself a disservice. This is an educational institution. I tell my people here, take off half a day, go take a course. I don't care which course, it's a suggestion. Okay, go sit in a class, listen to a lecture listen to 3 lectures a week, learn something new and come back. If you look at every endeavor where India has been successful, on a large, massive scale, take the most recent success, and I call it a success, our vaccination drive. We vaccinated almost over 1 billion people at a fraction of the cost that every country else in the world did it. there was only two reasons for it. One, the vaccine was indigenously designed and manufactured. Two, there was a platform that was developed purely using human capital.
Right.
If you look at the amount of actual cost that went into creating a CoWIN platform on which the whole vaccination drive happened, it was basically an investment of human capital at a tiny fraction of the true cost.
Right.
I think we will see more of these evolve. I go back to the example of Ubuntu Linux. Linux as an operating system forms the basis of a lot of what we do, right? And it was designed as a freeware for people to just download, use.
Right.
And then there's a whole community of users that even today keep the operating system going. It's an ecosystem in itself. So they're all devoting a fraction of their time to do something, be it for themselves in the form of skilling or be it for somebody outside. This is something we don't see enough of in India. I really want to see more of that happen.
Right.
People setting aside a fraction of their time to do something else. If you look at the nature of where we are going to work going forward, or the way we are going to structure our work days, I am seeing a lot of people asking, can I work part-time? Several of my alumni come to me and say, look, I have 20% of my time to give to IIT. Do you have a way of taking advantage of my 20% of the time?
Right.
I think we will see these fractional work days divided among many different, many different avocations, becoming sort of more of the norm in some way. There is a problem with that also. I mean, the problem is, one, you are relying on the individual to keep the worlds apart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you are also relying on the individual more heavily to police themselves to output. The top 1 or 2 or 3 layers of any company have a very clear mission in their minds, and that's the way companies are structured.
Right.
They're not driven by money, they're not driven by, they're just passionate about a mission. That's who gets up to the top.
Right.
The bottom level people need or desire flexibility today. So I think that if you can figure out what that glue layer will look like in a company or in an organization largely, I think we would have cracked it.
So our ideal history is time and materials driven work. If we were in a position to start looking at roles driven identity playing in an ecosystem.
Yeah. So if you go, it's an interesting question and an interesting thought. If you go back to the way most companies today are structured, surprisingly, it goes back to old Ford's definition of a manufacturing line. You have a car,
yes,
and one person is there to only tighten the left wheel screws.
Right.
There's someone else welding the, welding the tailpipe onto the chassis. Adam Smith, when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, actually he conjectured that this would be a problem. That in the pursuit of wealth alone, you would have specializations. And he wondered, because that was at the time when democracies were taking root, he wondered whether this worker who tightens screws, the left screw on a car for 8 hours a day, would be capable of going home, having a supper, then come back and participate knowledgeably in a town hall meeting where they were going to choose a corporator, let's say, right? And so I think that problem holds even today. We will see a change in the way we work, but it goes back to your original idea of creating a space to educate yourself. In pursuit of pure profit, both the employee and the employer in the manufacturing parlance have evolved to maximize their profit and forsake their long-term benefit of one extra day of education.
Right.
The employer says, you work 4 days a week, I'll pay you 4 days. The worker says, no, I'll work 5 days, pay me 5 days. And in the context, both appear to have developed served a short-term profit motive, but neither has served their long-term profit motive. I think companies are now beginning to see that. There is another shift in the same direction as I see. Much smaller companies, you have these, GEs, Apples, TCS that are, hundreds of thousands of employees. If you take a company of 10 or 15 or 20, you'll see a lot more of the everybody does everything than the one person does one thing well. I think we will see companies increasingly become structured into smaller business units responsible for their own P&L, where you're far more fragmented in the structure itself. So imagine Apple was 1,000 startups,
Right.
right, wholly owned by one investment company. The way that investment company would operate this large empire would be certainly different from the way Apple operates its empire today. For example, IIT has an incubator of 200 plus startups in there. No two startups, startups talk to each other as long as there's some business interest.
Right.
But imagine you are the incubator, and you are a for-profit incubator as opposed to ours. If you are a for-profit incubator, what would you do with this collection of startups? What would you enable for them? That thinking would actually serve the longer term goal. So I always look at either a mall. What can a mall do to increase its revenue? Each shop is operating as a business unit. Mm-hmm. What could an incubator do to maximize its revenue or profits? Because each startup is on its own. So if you knew answers to these questions, I think you would have an answer to the future of work, in at least some visibility of what the future of work will look like.
But there are answers to that. So that is the changing of perspectives. The person who builds a mall, if he changed the mindset of a retailer to the mindset of the lifetime of a consumer and a customer, to him, the person who buys space to display their wares and goods in a mall is a customer. But you and I who visit that are a consumer. And there is a deep connection between this triangle. Imagine this, if that perspective changed and Amazon said, my business model is serving the consumer.
Correct.
It will not create systems that makes you buy at your most vulnerable moment. Can we expect Google, Apple, Amazon to change their business models overnight? That is the incentive of the hundreds of startups that are actually starting today, who are essentially replicating the Amazon and the Alphabet and the Apple models. Instead, if they came from the other end of the spectrum, they have a phenomenally greater chance of bringing both Amazon, these larger behemoths, and the smaller ones to come to the middle of that spectrum.
There is a business to be built there for sure, and I know people who are exploring that space as well. Very good point. If you look at, for example, a Google, the product they've sold is you and me.
Right.
They've packaged you and me into a product and they're selling that to advertisers. And this is a paradigm that I don't remember a parallel in the pre-digital age where the consumer and the customer were different. Consumer rights, where you and I have been packaged into a product, is not something that can be guarded purely from business interests. I think we'll see a day when the pendulum will swing back the other way.
Right.
Where, for example, one could imagine a paid search engine which is as good as the best in the world, that doesn't package you and me into a product to sell to a customer, where if I am paying a fee per month to avail of search as a service, I don't need to be sold for the company to make revenue. Imagine you were in a library in the olden days, you were reading a book, and there was somebody watching over your shoulder, watching your eyeballs as to which part of the text you were focusing on, did a record and told the librarian exactly what you did that day. You'd be scared. You'd just simply not allow it. I think the digital age has completely gone into that level of let's say, lack of respecting privacy.
The future of work, the 8 to 18, which will enter your campus for the next 10 to 15 years, and the 18 to 25 who occupy your campus either as researchers or as students or as people working in the industry, working with you, these are the people that are shaping the new world. What is the thinking behind that future of work where you need to be prepared now in order to prepare them. What is the plan to transform this workforce not to the 100% of digital economy, but maybe 10% of the digital economy, the brightest of the minds, the most willing of them? How can we create mechanisms and means for them so that they can succeed?
So I'll say the future of work is hybrid. There will be some in-person presence and some online interactions. An IIT graduate or any graduate who's a thinking person is increasingly becoming motivated by the mission that the companies define. If, and money is, I am seeing this from the students that I talk to here, that money is becoming less and less primary. It is becoming, they know it will follow, so they have that confidence. So given that confidence, if you told these people, here is your mission, and they are expecting a company to define that mission, because those that can define their own mission go on to start a company themselves. So I am seeing both of these as well. So the ones that want to go work for a company want to see a clear mission for themselves in that company. Like to your earlier point, they want to be able to write a story on LinkedIn. Say, this is what I do, right? And to say I write Java code for whichever project comes my way is no longer a satisfying pair of sentences to write on LinkedIn on their profile.
Right.
I think we are sort of in that age where everybody is looking for a story to tell the world. It used to be a story to tell your uncles and aunts at this an inconvenient reunion. Now it's to tell the world. Right? And so increasingly students, especially IIT graduates, want to go into roles. I see this role word used quite a bit. Role and profile are used is the student terminology for it. Mission is my terminology for what they say. So they want to see a role. The role didn't interest me, or the profile was not that great, are ways of saying they didn't show me a mission for me in that company. A lot of the graduates in the generations to come, in the next 10 years, will feel financially confident because they've seen a generation that used education as a way to riches. So they believe in education as a way to riches, which means that if I am educated, I have this belief, I'm not now worried about riches because I know it will follow. What am I next worried about? That story I have on my LinkedIn profile. I want a coherent story that I am proud of to put on my LinkedIn profile. And so people, when they read, respect me. That's the currency that I get paid. That's an alternate currency that I get paid by in the social media world outside. So that is becoming the way by which companies are attracting good talent, and both attract, retain, and sort of leverage. We talked of human capital as being India's biggest sort of resource. I think the more we see investment in human capital in this fashion, we will see a more accelerated movement towards a different India. Startups are phenomenal at defining missions, because they don't have the money power or the brand value to attract an excellent programmer to come. They tell this kid, you are here to change the way people look at photos. It turns out that the guy has to go write Python code. But that's not the reason. You are here to change the way people look at photos on their mobile phone. You are here to change the way, let's say, a person buys their shoes. Or just this morning I was just thinking aloud, perfume shopping online is an absolutely horrible experience today. There's nothing I can do to replace the brick and mortar experience. So I was wondering what could be a technology that could come in. So I can imagine a startup or two stepping in and saying, you're here to change the way people buy perfumes for the rest of their lives. There's a mission clearly defined. I think the more we move towards, more we understand the currency that drives the currency that people want to get paid in, I think the more we will also sort of be geared towards retaining and growing the best of talent.
So to cap our conversation today, what will it take for people to understand that, matching and pairing are not the same, that integration and fusion are not the same, and information technology and digital technology are not the same?
The question you ask is a very deep one, and there are many companies trying to grapple with answers to that question. So it would be hard pressed of me to believe that a young graduate of any institution would have an in-depth understanding of the questions that you're raising, including me. I include myself in the group of people that don't understand the depth of the questions you just asked. I think, but the ones that have a view of that answer would be the ones that would define the next 10, 20 years of both, of workforce certainly, because they would understand the reward structures that would drive people. The world we live in is a very different place compared to even 10 years ago, given how interconnected we are. The more companies realize the social capital that has to be paid with the financial capital, the more they would retain at least the more intellectual talent. I think a large fraction of the workforce may still be motivated primarily by financial benefit, but there is a significant fraction of the workforce that is motivated by social benefit. And I'll say the more companies realize that, the more we would be better off for it. What are IITs doing to help train this next generation workforce? We've made a strategic decision that every class will be taught only hybrid. This being the undercurrent in every class, one could imagine the workforce that would graduate out of this kind of a system would be geared to work in that kind of an environment. We are here to train students to think not of jobs, not even of careers, but of their mission in life. I would like to see our systems reach a day where we are training students to define their mission in life and then pursue it.
Dr. Panchagnula, I'm deeply grateful. This has been a great conversation, a very learning one, and I'm sure it's going to be for our audience. And the only request I would like to cap this conversation with is that you will allow me to come back and have more conversations with you.
It'll be my pleasure, Subbu.
Hi everyone out there. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. In this first monologue, I want to be able to establish the fact that growth is the only concern that each one of us must have as a priority on our minds. Why? Because we face grave existential threats, and science needs to lead us where science needs to be understood as data. Science is not an esoteric practice, but rather life itself. Don't let those godmen fool you that science is diverse from life or religion. Every religion promotes the practice of inward inquiry that is data driven. Of course, research is external driven and is only trying to find information that already exists. We are at a strategic inflection point on our planet where the old will not suffice. We have to discover the new. And the process of discovering the new starts from inquiry, leads to exploration, and therefore the discovery. We need technology today to help us inquire, explore, and discover data about us, because we are drowned in noise and distracted by commerce. The transformation that is demanded is almost of spiritual proportions, taking control of life with data computed at source. It is not the science, but the way we approach it that needs to transform. The Center of Disease Control, CDC in North America, led us all to believe
that its pronouncements in the last 2.5 years of COVID was science-based. And it turns out that that data was inaccurate. Educational institutions are catalysts for this transformation that must target with renewed zeal the age segments of 8 to 18 Gen A, 18 to 25 Gen Z, 25 to 40 Gen Y, 40 to 60 Gen X, and 60 plus baby boomers. Each one of these 8 segments have a very unique contribution to shape the future and therefore need to be educated to take accountability with relevance. Each of these 8 segments learn differently, have different roles in producing outcomes, and have different rates of learning. There are no more subject matter experts, or SMEs as we call them, but only learners. Because just as we speak, the earth under our feet is shifting the center of gravity of this planet. We must make content, which is education, engaging and experiential in this new digital world. Content needs to be created, purposed, consumed, and ingested to energize individuals and society to spur into action. The relationship between an educator and an educated should be a symbiotic one that is established on the principles of sharing, collaboration, and co-creation. The sweet spot of growth is at the intersection of these 3 dimensions of learning: curriculum, pedagogies, and approaches to transformation and innovation must occupy the hearts and minds of the people, especially those who are involved in the field of education. This is where the creator economy begins. There must be no doubt in our minds that we have arrived at this point on our planet, working for the growth of a few who control power through money and authority. The time has come for each one of us to take accountability, to power ourselves with new ideas and concepts, with data autonomy, to reverse the conventional structures, synergies, and systems. The threat is not about transformation and its outcomes itself, but rather the preparedness to approach this transformation. I have had a professor of economics at one of India's premier educational institutions, who by his own admission is involved in the subjects of poverty, livelihood, financial inclusion, and banking, tell me that he did not see a connection between these subjects and the future of work. And this is appalling. As long as our approach and direction is right, we can leave the timelines to the wind. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi sees a vision of India being a developed nation in 2047. That does not mean we wait until 2047 to show up. Just this pivot to see our education transform will take several years, with several turnarounds of technology. We just can't show up in the future expecting a higher quality of life. The aspiration must find expression in the work and its outcomes that we do now. There is no future without sustainable growth. And this has to be an outcome of the work that each one of us produces. And here is our POV. We need to shape the future with design thinking that draws solutions for a better planet. And then we need to be able to create design that works the applications of life. Digital then takes over to create flexibility and convenience that we all have gotten so used to. And growth must be the only obsession that must preoccupy our minds. Growth not just driven by enterprise, but rather driven by individuals. And here are 5 important percepts that will help us course this journey effectively. Growth must be paired with value, where value must be perceived mutually inclusively in all the 5 dimensions of functional, lifetime, brand, emotional, and economic value. Aspiration must be paired with design thinking. The collective aspiration of our societies must be engined with value, intellectual, and human capital. Expectations of performance must be paired with design, where design must address the interoperability of operations and innovation. Workforce must be paired with workplaces, where digital connects the flow of work, fusing intelligence, facilitating sharing and collaboration across ecosystems. And finally, operations must be paired with innovation, where artificial intelligence automates operations and cognitive intelligence orchestrates collaboration for a sustainable growth. This video podcast has been created to catalyze our collective thinking and to produce collaborative action. Please do subscribe to a channel of your choice from the list provided. Let's work together for this future of work starting now. Let's head in the right direction. Please join the dialogue with your comments and feedback. Write to fow@giggr.app. You can even share video clips of your perspectives that we will include in our video podcasts. Stay in touch and be involved. We'll look forward to seeing you #Tuesdays at 5 when a new episode will be released. In the next episode, our guest is Professor Vasanthi Srinivasan, Faculty, Organizational Behavior and Human Resource Management, Chairperson, Digital Learning, IIMB. Until then, be safe, be healthy, be learning.